Good evening, driver. Welcome back to another long night on the American highways. Tonight we're heading west, all the way west, to where the continent meets the ocean and dreams collide with reality. We're talking about California, the Golden State, and the roads that made it possible. Pull your rig over to a safe spot, pour yourself another cup of coffee, and settle in. Because tonight's story is a long one, and it needs to be. California's highways tell the story of America itself, of migration and gold fever, of engineering marvels and broken promises, of freedom and consequence. From the coastal cliffs of Highway 1 to the grinding commerce of Interstate 5, from the ghost towns along Route 66 to the suburban sprawl carved by 1,000 freeways, every mile of California pavement whispers a different chapter of who we are and who we thought we'd become. I've driven these roads for years now, and I can tell you something most folks don't understand until they've spent time out here. California isn't just a place, it's an idea. It's the edge of the map, the last stop, the place where people ran out of continent and had to stop running or learn to swim. And the highways that brought them here, that connect this impossibly diverse state from the Mexican border to Oregon, from the Pacific breakers to the Nevada desert, those highways are more than asphalt and concrete. They're the arteries of the American dream itself, pumping hope and heartbreak in equal measure. So let's take this slow, mile by mile, era by era. Let's talk about the paths that came before the highways, about the 49ers who walked across deserts chasing rumors of gold, about the Chinese laborers who blasted through mountain granite to lay railroad tracks, about the visionaries who imagined roads along impossible cliffs, and about the millions of ordinary people who loaded up their cars and headed west, following a promise that California whispered in their ears. By the time we're done, you'll understand why California matters, not just as a state, but as a symbol. And you'll understand why its highways, from the engineering masterpieces to the overlooked stretches of cracked pavement, represent something bigger than transportation. They represent transformation. They represent the relentless American belief that if you can just get to the next place, if you can just keep moving, everything will be different. Everything will be better. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it wasn't. But they came anyway, millions of them, decade after decade, and California's highways received them all. Let's start at the beginning. Before there was Highway 1, before Interstate 5 cut through the Central Valley like a knife through butter, before Route 66 delivered Dust Bowl refugees to the California border, there were other paths. Older paths. Paths made by feet, not wheels. The Spanish understood this first. When they arrived in the late 1700s, they established a chain of missions stretching from San Diego to Sonoma, each one about a day's walk from the next. 21 missions in all, connected by a dirt trail they called El Camino Real, the Royal Road. It wasn't much, really, just a footpath wide enough for a man on horseback or a cart pulled by oxen. But it was the first thread that bound California together, the first hint that this wild coast could be connected, controlled, civilized. The missions are still there, many of them. You pass their bells and whitewashed walls along Highway 101, along sections of Interstate 5. They're tourist attractions now, places where school kids take field trips and learn about Father Junipero Serra. But drive past them at night, when the lights are off and the parking lots are empty, and you can almost see the ghosts. Native Californians forced into conversion, into labor, into a new world that ground their old world to dust. The missions represented connection, sure, but they also represented conquest. Every road does if you look close enough. For decades, that was enough. California was remote, isolated, a Spanish colony, and then a Mexican territory barely connected to anything. The few Americans who made it this far came by ship, sailing around South America in journeys that took 6 months or more. California was a rumor, a distant place of gentle weather and Mexican rancho, too far away to matter much to the young United States. And then on January 24, 1848, everything changed. James Marshall was building a sawmill for John Sutter along the American River in Coloma when he spotted something gleaming in the water. Gold. Not much, just some flakes and small nuggets, but enough. Word leaked out, as word always does, and by 1849 the greatest migration in American history had begun. They called them the 49ers, and they came from everywhere. From the East Coast cities, from the Midwest farms, from Europe and Latin America and China and Australia. They came by ship, booking passage to San Francisco or Panama, and then overland to the Pacific. They came by wagon train, following the California Trail across 2,000 miles of prairie and desert and mountains, risking cholera and thirst and starvation and native attack. They came because California had gold, and gold meant possibility. Think about that journey for a moment. 25,000 to 30,000 people crossed overland in 1849 alone. On foot in wagons, with everything they owned strapped to their backs or loaded into carts. The California Trail took them up the Platte River, across the Continental Divide, through South Pass, then southwest along the Humboldt River across Nevada and up over the Sierra Nevada. 6 months if they were lucky, longer if they weren't. The trail was marked by graves, so many graves. Cholera killed thousands in the early weeks when wagon trains were packed close together and water sources got contaminated. Accidents killed more, drownings at river crossings, wagon wrecks, gunshot wounds from careless handling. Exhaustion killed people. Starvation killed people. Some made bad decisions and died in the mountains, like the Donner Party just 3 years earlier, trapped in early snow and resorting to cannibalism to survive. But they came anyway. By 1849, 90,000 people had arrived in California from around the world. By 1855, 300,000. San Francisco exploded from a village of about 1,000 people to a city of 25,000, then more. Mining camps sprang up in the Sierra foothills with names that told their own stories. Hangtown Whiskey Bar, Hell's Delight, Poker Flat. The landscape itself was transformed, rivers diverted, hillsides torn apart, forests cut down for lumber and fuel. Most of them didn't strike it rich. The gold was real, absolutely, but it was hard to find and harder to keep. The real money was made by the merchants who sold supplies to the miners. Sam Brannan became California's first millionaire by stocking his store at Sutter's Fort with mining equipment, and then walking through San Francisco with a bottle of gold flakes, shouting about the riches in the American River. The price of everything skyrocketed. Eggs sold for $50 a dozen. A single apple could cost $5. If you had goods to sell, California was paradise. If you were looking for gold, it was usually just hard labor for uncertain reward. But the gold rush did something more important than create wealth. It created California as we know it. It brought the population and economic importance that made statehood possible in 1850, just 2 years after the territory was acquired from Mexico. It brought diverse people from around the world, creating a cosmopolitan culture unlike anywhere else in America. It brought Chinese immigrants by the tens of thousands, first to mine and later to build the railroads. It brought a sense of possibility, a feeling that in California the rules were different, that you could reinvent yourself, that the old hierarchies of the East Coast didn't apply. And it brought something else too. The idea that California was the destination, the end of the trail, the place you went when you'd run out of other places to go. That idea would echo through every migration wave that followed, through every family that loaded up a car and headed west on Route 66, through every truck driver who hauls freight from New York to Los Angeles, through every person who ever looked at a map and thought, California, that's where I need to be. But first, California needed to be connected. The wagon trails weren't enough. The sea routes around South America were too slow and expensive. What California needed was something faster, something that could bind the state to the rest of the nation and bind its own scattered settlements to each other. What California needed was the railroad. On May 10, 1869, at a desolate spot called Promontory Summit in Utah Territory, two railroad lines met. The Central Pacific, building east from Sacramento. The Union Pacific, building west from Omaha. When Leland Stanford drove the ceremonial golden spike into the last rail tie, connecting the two lines, the United States became truly united for the first time. You could board a train in New York and step off in San Francisco 7 days later. A journey that had taken 6 months by wagon now took a week. It was a miracle of engineering and human endurance, and California was at the heart of it. The Central Pacific Railroad Company had been founded in 1861 by a group of Sacramento merchants who would become known as the Big Four: Leland Stanford, Collies Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker. They were businessmen, not railroad men, and they saw an opportunity. The Pacific Railroad Act of 1862, signed by President Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War, offered enormous incentives to anyone willing to build a transcontinental railroad. Land grants, government bonds. The more miles of track you laid, the more money you got. There was just one problem. Between Sacramento and the Nevada border lay the Sierra Nevada, some of the most rugged mountains in North America. Granite peaks rising over 7,000 feet. Winter snowfall measured in dozens of feet. Sheer cliffs and narrow canyons where no road had ever run. They needed workers, thousands of workers, and they couldn't find enough willing to do the brutal labor. So Charles Crocker suggested something radical: hire Chinese immigrants. There were thousands of them in California by then, veterans of the gold rush who'd faced discrimination and violence and limited opportunities. Many had experience with explosives and tunnel work from mining, and they'd work for less than white laborers. It was exploitation, make no mistake. The Chinese workers got paid less, were given the most dangerous jobs, were housed in worse conditions. But they also proved to be extraordinary laborers, disciplined and skilled and willing to do work that seemed impossible. They blasted tunnels through solid granite using black powder and later, the volatile new explosive nitroglycerine. They were lowered down cliff faces in wicker baskets to drill holes and set charges, dangling over 1,000-foot drops with nothing but rope between them and death. They worked through the brutal Sierra winters, sometimes tunneling through snow drifts 30 feet deep just to reach the work site. In the winter of 1866-67, entire crews were buried by avalanches, their bodies not recovered until the spring thaw. The hardest section was Summit Tunnel, also called Tunnel Number 6, through Donner Pass. It took nearly 2 years to complete, from 1865 to 1867. The tunnel was 1,659 feet long, bored through solid granite at an elevation of over 7,000 feet. They worked from both ends and from shafts sunk from the top, crews working around the clock in shifts. When the tunnels met in the middle, they were off by only inches, a stunning achievement given the primitive surveying equipment of the time. By August 1867, the Central Pacific had conquered the Sierra Nevada. From there, the work went faster. Across the Nevada desert into Utah, racing against the Union Pacific to lay as many miles of track as possible. On April 28, 1869, Central Pacific crews set a record that still stands. 10 miles of track laid in a single day, a feat of coordination and endurance that impressed even their rivals. And then Promontory Summit, the Golden Spike, the ceremonial photographs with locomotives touching nose to nose, telegraph wires carrying the news across the nation, bells ringing and cannons firing in celebration from coast to coast. The transcontinental railroad changed everything. It made California accessible in a way that had never been possible before. Settlers could bring their families west without risking death on the Oregon Trail. Farmers could ship their produce east to markets. Manufacturers could move goods in both directions. The time to travel from New York to San Francisco dropped from months to days, and the cost dropped even more dramatically. But the railroad also had consequences that nobody celebrated with golden spikes. It accelerated the destruction of Native American cultures across the West. The buffalo that sustained Plains tribes were hunted nearly to extinction, many of them shot from train windows by passengers seeking entertainment. The reservations that confined Native peoples were made easier to enforce with soldiers transported by rail. And for the Chinese workers who'd built the Central Pacific, there was no celebration. Once the railroad was complete, most of them were laid off immediately. They scattered across California and the West, finding work where they could, facing ongoing discrimination and violence. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, banning Chinese immigration entirely, a law that wouldn't be repealed until 1943. The railroad brought California into the modern age. It connected the state to the nation and connected California's cities to each other. But it also demonstrated something important about transportation infrastructure. It's never neutral. Every road, every rail line, every highway creates winners and losers, opens doors for some people while closing them for others, connects some places while bypassing others. The Transcontinental Railroad was a triumph, but it was a complicated one. And the same would be true of the highways that came later. If you want to understand what makes California different, take a drive up Highway 1. Start down in Orange County, where the highway begins near Dana Point, carrying the official designation of State Route 1, but known to everyone as Pacific Coast Highway, or just PCH. Follow it north through the beach communities of Southern California, Laguna Beach and Newport Beach in Malibu, past the sprawl of Los Angeles, up through Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo. And then somewhere around San Simeon something changes. The road narrows, the cliffs rise higher, the ocean crashes closer. You've entered Big Sur and you've entered a different world. The most beautiful stretch of highway in America, people call it, maybe the most beautiful in the world. For roughly 90 miles from San Simeon to Carmel, Highway 1 clings to the edge of the continent, carved into cliffs 1,000 feet above the Pacific. On one side, the Santa Lucia Mountains rise steep and green. On the other side, nothing but air and then the endless blue of the ocean, waves breaking white on rocks far below. It took 18 years to build this section of road. 18 years. The story goes back to 1919, when a country doctor named John L. D. Roberts was riding his horse along the coast between Monterey and Point Sur, trying to reach a shipwreck where injured sailors needed help. It took him nearly 4 hours to cover the rough trail, and he spent that time imagining something better. A road. A proper road that could connect the isolated communities of the Big Sur coast to the rest of California. Roberts photographed the terrain and advocated for the highway, and eventually the state legislature agreed. Construction began in 1919 with the first appropriation of $15 million. It wouldn't be enough. Not even close. The workers faced challenges that would have stopped a less determined generation. The mountains came right down to the sea, leaving almost no flat ground to work with. The rock was hard granite and unstable shale, requiring constant blasting. The weather was unpredictable, with winter storms washing away months of work in a single night. There were no towns nearby, no supply depots, no easy way to get equipment and materials to the work sites. They used everything available, hand tools and mules in the early years, later trucks and steam shovels. They quarried rock from the mountains and crushed it for roadbed. They built temporary wooden bridges across canyons, then replaced them with permanent concrete spans. They dangled workers on ropes down cliff faces to drill holes for explosive charges, just like the Chinese workers had done on the railroad half a century earlier. The most famous result is Bixby Creek Bridge, completed in 1932. It's the bridge you've seen in 1,000 car commercials, the rainbow arch spanning a coastal canyon 260 feet above the creek. Building it required 825 truckloads of concrete, 600,000 pounds of reinforcing steel, and 300,000 board feet of Douglas fir for the wooden forms. It's a work of art masquerading as infrastructure, and it's just one of 33 bridges along this stretch of highway. In 1937, after 18 years of labor and a final cost of nearly $10 million, the Big Sur section of Highway 1 officially opened. Hearst Castle, William Randolph Hearst's massive hilltop mansion above San Simeon, had been under construction for the same 18 years, and it cost about the same amount to build. One man's house and one stretch of road, both monuments to the ambitions of their era. Today, Highway 1 is an all-American road, one of the most scenic drives on the planet. Tourists come from around the world to navigate its curves, stopping at overlooks to photograph the coast, eating at roadside restaurants in Carmel and Big Sur Village, visiting Point Lobos State Reserve and Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park. It's California's greatest highway, the one that appears in every tourism brochure and every romantic movie set in the state. But it's also a working road. Truck drivers haul produce from farms along the coast. Local residents commute to jobs in Monterey and Santa Cruz, and the road requires constant maintenance, an endless battle against the forces that created Big Sur in the first place. Landslides are the primary enemy. The mountains are still rising, pushed up by the collision of tectonic plates, and what rises must also fall. Winter rains saturate the soil and undercut the slopes. Earthquakes shake loose rock faces. Every few years, a major slide closes Highway 1 for weeks or months at a time. In 2017, a massive slide at Mud Creek buried a quarter-mile section of road under 30 to 40 feet of rock and debris. It took more than a year to clear and rebuild, costing $50 million. The most treacherous section is Devil's Slide, south of San Francisco near Pacifica. For decades, this stretch of Highway 1 was known for deadly accidents and chronic closures due to landslides. Caltrans wanted to build an inland bypass over Montara Mountain, but environmental groups opposed it, arguing for tunnels instead. After years of debate and lawsuits, the tunnels won. The Tom Lantos tunnels opened in 2013, boring through the mountain and leaving the old coastal road to become a hiking and biking trail. From a truck driver's perspective, Highway 1 is tricky territory. The twists and turns and narrow lanes make it slow going, and there are strict restrictions on vehicle size and weight in many sections. Most commercial traffic avoids it entirely, sticking to Highway 101 or Interstate 5. But some loads have to go coastal, delivering to towns that Highway 1 is the only way to reach. When you're behind the wheel of a big rig on those Big Sur curves, with a 1,000-foot drop on your right and a rock wall on your left, you understand respect for the road in a whole new way. Yet there's something almost spiritual about it too. The scale of the landscape, the meeting of mountain and ocean, the sense that this coast has been here for millions of years and will be here for millions more, long after the highway crumbles and falls. You're not just driving, you're witnessing. You're participating in something larger than yourself. Highway 1 represents California's best impulse, the desire to showcase beauty, to make the magnificent accessible, to build something worthy of the landscape. But it also represents California's eternal struggle with its own geography. The state sits on the ring of fire, on active fault lines, on mountains that are still rising and cliffs that are still falling. Nothing stays still here. Nothing is permanent. The roads we build are temporary agreements with forces we can't control, and yet we keep building them. We keep maintaining them, because California without Highway 1 would be a different place, a lesser place. Sometimes the impossible is worth attempting, even if you know you'll be fighting to preserve it forever. There's a stretch of old pavement in the Mojave Desert, cracked and weathered, half buried by drifting sand, that most drivers don't even notice. It runs parallel to Interstate 40 near the ghost town of Amboy, just another abandoned road in a landscape full of abandoned things. But if you know what you're looking for, you can still see the faded paint of a double yellow line, still make out the edges where asphalt meets desert hardpan. This is Route 66, the Mother Road, the main street of America, the highway that carried the hopes of a generation. Route 66 was officially established on November 11, 1926, as part of the new U.S. highway system. It ran 2,448 miles from Chicago to Los Angeles, or more precisely to Santa Monica, where it ended at the Pacific Ocean on Santa Monica Boulevard. The California portion was about 320 miles, entering the state at Needles on the Arizona border, crossing the Mojave Desert through Barstow and Victorville, then following surface streets through the growing Los Angeles Basin to the sea. For its first decade, Route 66 was just another highway, paved in some sections and dirt in others, serving the towns and cities along its route but not particularly famous. That changed in the 1930s. The Dust Bowl hit the Great Plains like a biblical plague. Years of drought and poor farming practices turned millions of acres of topsoil to powder. When the wind blew, the sky turned black with dirt. Crops failed. Cattle died. Banks foreclosed on farms. Families packed everything they owned into old cars and trucks and headed west, following rumors that California had jobs, had opportunity, had farms that needed workers to pick fruit and vegetables. Route 66 was their highway. It was the most direct route from Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas to California, and it passed through relatively gentle terrain compared to other western routes. By 1938, it was fully paved, making it the first completely paved highway connecting Chicago to the West Coast. John Steinbeck immortalized this migration in his 1939 novel, The Grapes of Wrath. He called Route 66 the Mother Road, writing, 66 is the path of a people in flight, refugees from dust and shrinking land, from the thunder of tractors and shrinking ownership. 66 is the Mother Road, the road of flight. More than 200,000 people fled the Dust Bowl to California in the 1930s, many of them via Route 66. They weren't welcomed. California was struggling through the Depression too, and locals feared the influx of poor migrants would overwhelm limited resources and drive down wages. Agricultural inspection stations at the state border turned into unofficial checkpoints where migrants could be turned away if they didn't have enough money or couldn't prove they had employment waiting. Some accounts, probably exaggerated but not entirely false, tell of desperate families who made it all the way to California only to be rejected at the border, sitting in their cars on the side of Route 66 with nowhere to go and no way to go back. But most got through. They spread across California's agricultural valleys, following the harvests, working for whatever wages growers were willing to pay. They lived in labor camps, in shanty towns in their cars. They were called Okies, a slur that meant poor, ignorant, dirty. But they endured. They survived. And gradually, they put down roots. Today, millions of Californians can trace their ancestry to those Dust Bowl migrants who rolled west on Route 66. World War II brought a different kind of migration. Military bases and defense industries sprouted across California, employing hundreds of thousands of workers. Route 66 became a crucial military supply route, trucks carrying equipment and materials to the West Coast for shipment to the Pacific Theater. After the war ended, many servicemen who trained in California returned with their families, drawn by the climate and the booming economy, and the promise of suburban homes with yards and swimming pools. This was Route 66's golden age. The 1950s and early 1960s, when American prosperity and car culture reached their peak. Route 66 became the iconic road trip, the highway adventure that every family wanted to experience. Drive-in restaurants and motels sprang up along its length, each one competing for travelers' attention with increasingly elaborate signs and architecture. Wigwam villages with rooms shaped like teepees. The blue whale of Cadusa. The Cadillac Ranch, restaurants advertising world's best pie and real Indian trading post, and cold beer dirty magazines. In California, the highway offered a cross-section of the state's diversity. From Needles, where summer temperatures could hit 120 degrees, you drive through the Mojave, past ghost towns like Goffs and Essex and Amboy with its distinctive crater and lava fields. Roy's Motel and Cafe in Amboy became an icon, its giant sign visible for miles across the desert. Then Barstow, a railroad town and later a major crossroads, and into the mountains through Cajon Pass, dropping into the Los Angeles Basin. From there, Route 66 followed surface streets, through San Bernardino, Fontana, Pasadena, into Los Angeles proper on Sunset Boulevard and Santa Monica Boulevard, past Hollywood and Beverly Hills to the Santa Monica Pier, where the highway officially ended and the Pacific began. But even as Route 66 reached its cultural peak, it was dying. The Interstate Highway System, authorized by the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, was designed to bypass the old surface routes. Interstates were faster, safer, more efficient. In California, Interstate 40 took over Route 66's path across the Mojave Desert. Interstate 15 captured the traffic through Cajon Pass. Interstate 10 became the main Los Angeles freeway. Town by town, Route 66 was decommissioned. Traffic dwindled on the old road as drivers chose the faster interstates. Motels went broke. Restaurants closed. Gas stations shut down. Some towns became ghost towns, like Glen Rio on the Texas-New Mexico border. Others survived by adapting, finding new reasons to exist beyond highway traffic. In 1984, Route 66 was officially removed from the U.S. highway system. The signs came down. On the map, it ceased to exist. But something strange happened. People missed it. The efficiency of the interstates came with a cost: sterility. Every interchange looked the same. Every rest stop had the same fast food chains. The interstates connected places, but they had no character, no soul, no sense of place. Route 66, for all its faded glory and demolished landmarks, had character. It had stories. So people started driving it again, deliberately choosing the old road over the interstate. Historians documented its history. Preservation groups formed to save remaining landmarks. Musicians wrote songs about it. Bobby Troops, Get Your Kicks On, Route 66, became a standard, recorded by everyone from Nat King Cole to the Rolling Stones. The 1960s TV show, Route 66, created a romantic vision of highway adventure. More recently, Pixar's Cars introduced a new generation to the mythology of the Mother Road. Today, about 85% of the original Route 66 can still be driven, including much of the California section. It's an exercise in nostalgia, a way to step outside the modern interstate system and experience a slower, more deliberate way of traveling. You can still eat at the restored gas stations-turned diners, still photograph the faded murals and neon signs, still feel the texture of the old concrete under your tires. In the California desert, where sections of the original alignment run parallel to Interstate 40, you can drive both roads in quick succession and understand viscerally what was lost and what was gained. The interstate is smooth, straight, fast. Route 66 is rough, winding, human-scaled. The interstate gets you there. Route 66 lets you experience the journey. As a truck driver, I have complicated feelings about Route 66. The interstates are better for commerce, no question. Safer, faster, designed for the big rigs that move America's goods. But there's something hollow about them too. When you spend long nights on Interstate 40 across the Mojave, radio crackling with other drivers' voices, watching the mile markers tick by in monotonous succession, you can understand why people romanticize the old road. Route 66 represented possibility. It represented the American belief that if you just started driving, if you just headed west toward California, You could leave your problems behind and find something better. Sometimes it was true. Sometimes it was an illusion. But the belief mattered. The hope mattered. The mother road is gone, officially speaking, but the idea of it endures. Every time someone loads up a car and heads to California, every time someone dreams about starting over, about reinvention, about the West as a land of second chances, they're following Route 66 whether they know it or not. The road may be decommissioned, but the journey never ends. Interstate 5 doesn't inspire poetry. It doesn't appear in pop songs or romantic movies. It doesn't have a nickname like Mother Road or a reputation like PCH. It's just the 5, or sometimes I-5, a number and nothing more. But if California has a backbone, this is it. From the Mexican border at Tijuana to the Oregon border near the town of Hilt, Interstate 5 runs 797 miles through California, making it the longest state route in the state system. It's not the most beautiful highway, not the most historic, not the most culturally significant. What it is, more than any other road in California, is essential. I-5 carries the commerce of the West. The trucks that move goods from the ports of San Diego, Los Angeles, and Oakland to distribution centers across the country. The refrigerated trailers hauling produce from the Central Valley's farms to markets nationwide. The tankers carrying fuel. The containers full of imported goods from Asia. If you ate a tomato today, bought something from Amazon, filled your car with gas, there's a good chance it traveled at least part of its journey on Interstate 5. The highway has 3 distinct personalities. In Southern California, from the border to the Grapevine, I-5 is an urban freeway. 8 lanes, 10 lanes, sometimes more. It cuts through San Diego, connects to the massive port complexes of Los Angeles and Long Beach, weaves through Orange County's suburban sprawl. Traffic is relentless. Morning and evening rush hours extend to midday and late afternoon. Accidents and construction delays are daily occurrences. This is I-5 at its most congested, most frustrating, most necessary. Then comes the Grapevine, the section that climbs through the Tehachapi Mountains via Tejon Pass. The highway was built in stages over 50 years, constantly improved and widened, and it represents some of the most dramatic highway engineering in California. Separate routes for northbound and southbound traffic, each carved into a different mountainside to ease the grade. Truck escape ramps every few miles in case brakes fail on the long downhill stretches. Chains required for trucks in winter when snow and ice make the pass treacherous. This section follows the route of older highways, including the original Ridge route built in 1915. That first road was a narrow, winding, 2-lane nightmare with a speed limit of 15 miles per hour in some sections. It took 4 hours to drive from Los Angeles to Bakersfield, and it was considered the only option besides going all the way around through the Mojave Desert and Tehachapi Pass. The modern I-5 through the Grapevine reduced that 4-hour drive to about 90 minutes, even with today's traffic, but it's still challenging, especially for trucks. The steep grades require constant attention to speed and braking. In 2007, a collision between 2 trucks in the tunnel under the main lanes sparked a fire that killed 3 people and shut down the highway for days. North of the Grapevine lies I-5's third personality, the Central Valley Freeway. For nearly 300 miles from Bakersfield to Sacramento, the highway runs straight and flat through some of the most productive agricultural land on Earth. The western San Joaquin Valley, the Sacramento Valley, fields of almonds and cotton and tomatoes stretching to the horizon, dairy farms and cattle ranches, small towns every 10 or 20 miles, Bakersfield, Delano, Tulare, Fresno, Madera, Merced, Modesto, Stockton, Sacramento. This is where Interstate 5 shows its utilitarian character. It's not scenic. The landscape is flat and agricultural, occasionally broken by small mountains, but mostly just endless fields and irrigation canals. There are long stretches with nothing but highway and farmland, no services, no towns, just mile after mile of two-lane freeway in each direction. It's also brutally hot in summer and fogged in during winter. Central Valley fog is legendary among truck drivers, thick as cotton and just as white, reducing visibility to a few dozen feet or less. Multi-vehicle pileups are common in fog season. You'll be cruising along at 70 miles per hour, and suddenly the fog hits like a wall. Brake lights appear too close, too fast. If you're lucky, you slow down in time. If you're not, you're just another wreck waiting for CAL FIRE and CHP to sort out. The Central Valley section follows roughly the path of old U.S. Route 99, which was decommissioned when I-5 was completed. The decision to route the interstate through the valley, instead of following Highway 101 along the coast, was controversial at the time. Coastal cities like San Luis Obispo complained that they were being bypassed. But the valley route was cheaper to build, more direct, and served California's agricultural heartland. That final section of I-5, from Stockton to Red Bluff, was the last part of the interstate system to be completed in California. On October 12, 1979, a ceremony near Stockton marked the connection of the final links. Representatives from Canada and Mexico attended, celebrating the first continuous freeway from Mexican Federal Highway 1 to British Columbia Highway 99, though the highway has different numbers in different jurisdictions. The total cost to build I-5 through California was estimated at $2.3 billion in 1979 dollars, equivalent to about $8 billion today. That doesn't include the constant maintenance and improvement that continues. From a truck driver's perspective, I-5 is a necessity. It's not where you go for the scenery or the experience. It's where you go to make time, to haul loads efficiently, to earn a living. You know every truck stop, every way station, every place where CHP likes to enforce weight limits and hours of service regulations. You know where the good coffee is, which rest areas are clean, which stretches of road are being worked on, and where the traffic will slow to a crawl. You also know I-5's reputation. It's one of the most dangerous highways in America. In 2022, it was responsible for 128 traffic deaths in California alone. The combination of high speeds, heavy truck traffic, urban congestion in Southern California, and treacherous weather conditions in the Central Valley make it a constant hazard. But it's also indispensable. California's economy would collapse without Interstate 5. The ports that handle billions of dollars in international trade, the farms that feed much of the nation, the distribution networks that connect producers to consumers, all of it depends on this highway. I-5 doesn't inspire romance. It doesn't appear in travel guides except as something to avoid if you want a scenic drive. But it's the highway that makes modern California possible. It's the artery that keeps goods flowing, the route that connects the state's sprawling geography, the backbone that holds it all together. There's a kind of beauty in that utility, if you know how to see it. Not the obvious beauty of Highway 1's coastal cliffs or Route 66's nostalgic charm, but the beauty of function, of systems working, of the mundane miracle that is a truck carrying lettuce from Salinas to Chicago arriving on time, in good condition, because I-5 got it through the night. Sometimes the most important roads are the ones we take for granted. On a warm December day in 1940, the Arroyo Seco Parkway opened to traffic in Los Angeles. It was 6 miles long, connecting downtown Los Angeles to Pasadena, featuring grade-separated interchanges and divided lanes with no stoplights. It was California's first freeway, and it represented a vision of the future. At the dedication ceremony, officials promised that this was just the beginning. California would build a network of freeways that would solve traffic congestion, enable unprecedented mobility, and create a new way of life centered around the automobile. Every home would have a car, or 2 or 3. You could live in the suburbs, surrounded by space and greenery, and commute to work in the city in 20 minutes or less. The freeways would make it all possible. For a brief, shining moment, the dream came true. The post-World War II era was California's moment of maximum transformation. The population doubled between 1945 and 1965. Defense industries converted to civilian production. Housing development sprang up across open land, particularly in Southern California and the Bay Area. Suburbs like Lakewood and Levittown became national models of affordable middle-class housing, and car ownership exploded. Between 1946 and 1958, car registrations in California increased by 10% every year. The automobile went from luxury to necessity, from novelty to normal, in the space of a single generation. California led the nation in freeway development. The Collier-Burns Act of 1947, passed by the state legislature and signed by Governor Earl Warren, raised the gas tax and created a dedicated highway trust fund. The revenue could only be used for road construction and maintenance, ensuring a steady stream of funding. California was building about 100 miles of new freeway every year through the 1950s and 1960s. The system that emerged became a model for the rest of the country. When President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, creating the interstate highway system, he based it largely on California's approach. Gas taxes and trust funds, grade-separated interchanges, limited access highways designed for high-speed travel. California experts testified before Congress, sharing their experience and expertise. The freeways changed everything about how California worked. They enabled suburban sprawl by making it possible to live far from your workplace. They transformed city centers as downtown businesses fled to suburban malls accessible by freeway off-ramps. They created new patterns of recreation, with families loading up the station wagon for weekend trips to the beach or the mountains or Disneyland. Drive-through restaurants emerged, pioneered by California chains like McDonald's, first location in San Bernardino, Carl's Jr., Anaheim, and In-N-Out Burger, Baldwin Park. Drive-in movie theaters spread across the suburban landscape. The car wasn't just transportation. It was a lifestyle, an identity, an extension of your personality. Los Angeles became the symbol of this new car culture. A sprawling city without a traditional downtown, connected by freeways rather than rail lines, built for automobiles rather than pedestrians. British architectural critic Rainer Banham celebrated it in his 1971 book, Los Angeles, The Architecture of Four Ecologies, arguing that the freeway system was itself a kind of architecture, a way of organizing urban space that was uniquely adapted to Southern California's geography and culture. For about 20 years, it seemed to work. The freeways were relatively uncongested. You really could drive from anywhere to anywhere in the Los Angeles Basin in about 20 minutes. The freedom and mobility they provided felt revolutionary. But even as the freeways were being celebrated, the problems were emerging. Traffic congestion returned, worse than before. As more people moved to California and more families owned multiple cars, the freeways filled up. The fundamental problem was mathematical. Roads generate their own demand. Build a highway to relieve congestion, and people will use that highway, moving farther from work, taking trips they wouldn't have otherwise made, until the highway is just as congested as the old roads were. Air pollution became severe, especially in Los Angeles. The combination of car exhaust, geography, a basin surrounded by mountains that trapped air, and sunshine, which drove photochemical reactions, created smog so thick that children couldn't play outside on bad days and residents developed respiratory problems. Suburbs sprawled endlessly, consuming agricultural land and natural habitat. Every year, thousands of acres of orange groves and strawberry fields and wetlands disappeared under housing developments and shopping malls. The population grew, but population density decreased, as everyone spread out across the landscape in single-family homes, and the freeways destroyed neighborhoods. Routing decisions were made based on engineering and cost, but they were also made based on political power. Freeways were driven through communities that had little political clout to resist. Poor neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods, immigrant communities. In Los Angeles, Boyle Heights was carved up by multiple freeway interchanges, scattering a vibrant Mexican-American community. In San Francisco, the Fillmore district, historically black, was devastated by freeway construction. This pattern repeated across California. Freeways followed the path of least resistance politically, which meant following the path through neighborhoods that couldn't fight back. Urban renewal, they called it, but the people who were displaced had a different name for it. The car culture that California pioneered and exported to the rest of America was built on exclusion and inequality. The suburban dream of a house with a yard and a garage required racial segregation, enforced by redlining and restrictive covenants. The freeways that made suburban living possible destroyed urban communities. The freedom that cars provided was only available to those who could afford cars, and the infrastructure was built to serve drivers at the expense of everyone else. By the 1970s, California's love affair with the freeway was souring. Environmental activists opposed new highway construction. Urban residents, increasingly non-white, demanded that their neighborhoods be preserved rather than demolished. Alternative car cultures emerged. Lowriders in Chicano communities, embracing low and slow, as a rejection of the freeway's emphasis on speed and efficiency. Hippies and environmentalists advocating for public transit and bicycle infrastructure. The 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake damaged elevated freeways in San Francisco, including portions of the Embarcadero Freeway and the Central Freeway. When the question arose of whether to rebuild them, San Francisco residents voted no. The freeways were demolished, replaced by surface boulevards and parks. The city reclaimed its waterfront views and neighborhood fabric, choosing density and walkability over automobile access. Today, California's relationship with the car is complicated. The state has some of the most congested highways in America. Los Angeles drivers spend more than 100 hours per year stuck in traffic. The Bay Area isn't much better. Gas prices are the highest in the nation. Environmental regulations are strict. The state has aggressive goals for electric vehicle adoption and climate change mitigation. Yet Californians still love their cars, or maybe need is more accurate than love. The state's geography and development patterns make car ownership nearly essential for most residents. Public transit exists, but doesn't serve most areas effectively. Attempts to build high-speed rail have been plagued by cost overruns and delays. The car culture that California created in the post-war era isn't going away. It's too embedded in the physical landscape, in the infrastructure, in people's lives. But it's changing, adapting, trying to address the problems it created while maintaining the mobility it provides. That original vision from the 1940 dedication of the Arroyo Seco Parkway, of freeways solving all transportation problems and enabling unlimited freedom, turned out to be both true and false. The freeways enabled extraordinary growth and mobility. They also created extraordinary problems. California's highways tell that story honestly, if you're willing to listen. Seen from the air, it's a massive concrete sculpture, ramps curving and stacking on top of each other in patterns that seem almost organic. It handles more than 500,000 vehicles per day, one of the busiest freeway interchanges in the world. It's also built on the ruins of Boyle Heights. Boyle Heights was once one of Los Angeles' most diverse neighborhoods. Jews and Japanese Americans and Mexican Americans lived side by side in a community that was working class but vibrant, with shops and restaurants and synagogues and churches. It wasn't wealthy, but it was alive, a neighborhood in the true sense of the word. Then came the freeways. First the Santa Ana Freeway, now Interstate 5, slashing through the eastern edge of the neighborhood in the 1950s. Then the Pomona Freeway, Interstate 10, cutting through the heart of it. Then the East LA interchange, where multiple freeways converged in a concrete knot that consumed hundreds of homes and businesses. The people of Boyle Heights fought the freeways, but they didn't have enough political power to stop them. They were redlined, meaning banks wouldn't give mortgages in their neighborhood, making it impossible to build wealth through homeownership. They were designated as a slum clearance area, which gave authorities legal cover to demolish homes and relocate residents. And they were Mexican American at a time when Mexican Americans had little voice in city planning. So the freeways came, and Boyle Heights was never the same. The neighborhood was physically divided, its networks of relationships torn apart. Property values declined. Those who could afford to leave did. Those who remained were trapped, surrounded by freeways, the constant noise and pollution, a reminder of what had been lost. This story isn't unique to Boyle Heights. It repeated in virtually every American city where freeways were built in the 1950s and 1960s. The pattern was always the same. Route the highway through the neighborhood with the least political power, usually a poor neighborhood, usually a minority neighborhood. Declare it blighted, demolish it, build the freeway, and then watch as the remaining community struggles with the consequences. In San Francisco, the Fillmore district was carved up by the Central Freeway. In Oakland, West Oakland was divided by Interstate 980 and the elevated section of Interstate 880. In San Diego, Logan Heights was bisected by Interstate 5. In Sacramento, Oak Park was split by Highway 99. The justification was always urban renewal. These neighborhoods were deteriorating anyway, the planners said. The freeway would bring economic development, improve access, modernize outdated infrastructure. And besides, the land was cheap. Building through these neighborhoods cost less than building through wealthier areas where property values were higher and residents had lawyers who could tie up projects in court. But urban renewal was a lie, or at best a cruel irony. The neighborhoods weren't deteriorating naturally. They were deteriorating because of redlining, because banks refused to lend there, because public investment went elsewhere. And the freeways didn't renew them. The freeways destroyed them. The effects are still visible today. Stand in what remains of Boyle Heights and look at the interchange looming above. Walk through West Oakland, where the elevated freeway casts permanent shadows on streets that once had sunlight. Visit any of California's cities where freeways divide, and you'll see the pattern. Prosperity on one side of the highway, poverty on the other. The concrete barrier as effective as any wall at maintaining segregation. But there were also forms of resistance. In East Los Angeles and other Chicano communities, a new car culture emerged in the 1960s and 1970s. Lowriders. These were cars customized to ride as low to the ground as possible, often with hydraulic systems that could raise and lower the body. They were painted with elaborate murals, polished to mirror brightness, fitted with expensive sound systems. They were works of art, statements of cultural pride, rejections of the mainstream car culture that prioritized speed and efficiency. Lowriders moved slowly, low and slow becoming both a description and a philosophy. They cruised boulevards rather than freeways, preferring to be seen and to see, to participate in community rather than just pass through it. The cars themselves told stories through their paint jobs, religious imagery, Mexican heritage, family pride, gang affiliations, political statements. Authorities responded with hostility. Cities passed ordinances banning cruising, making it illegal to drive the same stretch of road multiple times in a certain period. Police targeted lowrider gatherings, citing minor infractions, treating the cars and their owners as threats to public order. But the culture persisted, adapting, spreading beyond California to Mexican-American communities across the Southwest and beyond. Lowriders represented an alternative vision of car culture, one that rejected the freeway's values of speed, anonymity, and isolation in favor of slowness, visibility, and community. They were a creative response to oppression, a way of taking the automobile, that symbol of American mobility and freedom, and making it serve different purposes, tell different stories, create different relationships. Other forms of resistance emerged too. The freeway revolt of the 1960s and 1970s saw activists, increasingly multiracial and cross-class, oppose new freeway construction. In San Francisco, protests stopped several planned freeways, including the Embarcadero Freeway's extension and a freeway that would have crossed Golden Gate Park. In Los Angeles, a proposed freeway through Beverly Hills was canceled after wealthy residents organized effective opposition. The lesson was clear: freeways could be stopped, but only if the neighborhood had enough political power to fight back. Poor neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods, they got the freeways. Wealthy neighborhoods, white neighborhoods, they got preservation. California's highways created freedom for some people and constraint for others. They enabled suburban prosperity while undermining urban communities. They provided mobility for those who could afford cars while stranding those who couldn't. They connected places while creating new forms of division. This isn't unique to California, but California was the pioneer, the place that showed America what car culture could be and what it would cost. The state built more freeways, built them earlier, built them bigger than anywhere else. And it experienced the consequences earlier too. Today, there's growing recognition that the freeway building of the mid-20th century was a mistake, or at least a mistake in how it was done and where it was rooted. Cities are starting to tear down some urban freeways, replacing them with surface boulevards that reconnect neighborhoods. California has committed to prioritizing equity in transportation planning, trying to undo some of the damage. But the highways are still there, concrete monuments to choices made decades ago. You can't unbuild an interstate. You can't bring back the neighborhoods that were demolished. The best you can do is acknowledge what happened, understand why it happened, and try to make better choices going forward. Every mile of California highway tells two stories: the story of what it enabled and the story of what it cost. Both stories are true. Both stories matter. Drive Interstate 40 across the Mojave Desert late at night, when the truck stops are closed and the rest areas are empty, and you'll understand why this landscape breeds ghosts. The desert looks like Mars under the headlights, alien and empty, rock and sand stretching to the horizon. The old Route 66 runs parallel to the interstate in places, visible as a faint line of broken pavement. And along that old road, scattered every 20 or 30 miles, are the ghost towns: Goffs, Essex, Chambliss, Amble, Ludlow. They're marked on the map as if they're still inhabited, but they're not really. A few buildings remain, sometimes just foundations. Faded signs advertising services that haven't been available in 50 years. Rusty gas pumps, collapsed roofs, chain-link fences around lots full of nothing but tumbleweeds. These towns were born with the railroad and grew with Route 66. They existed to serve travelers: gas, food, water, lodging, repairs. When Route 66 was the main route to California, these towns survived. When Interstate 40 bypassed them in the 1960s and 1970s, they died. Amboy is the most famous, or the most infamous. In its heyday, it had a population of several hundred, with a motel and cafe and gas station serving Route 66 travelers. Roy's Motel and Cafe, with its distinctive sign, became an icon of the Mother Road. But when I-40 opened a few miles north, traffic on Route 66 dwindled to almost nothing. By the 1990s, Amboy was essentially abandoned. Roy stood empty for years, slowly decaying in the desert heat. The town itself, what was left of it, belonged to a single owner who tried various schemes to revitalize it. A model community, a ghost town tourist attraction, an artist's colony. Nothing quite worked. In 2005, a preservationist bought the entire town and began restoring Roy's. Today, you can buy gas there again, and food and souvenirs. But it's more museum than town, a preserved relic of a vanished era. Drive through Amba at midnight and you'll feel the strangeness of it. The lights of Roy's are the only lights for miles. The silence is profound, broken only by wind and the occasional truck on the distant interstate. The landscape feels haunted not by spirits but by memory, by the millions of people who passed through here on their way to California, each one carrying their own dreams and fears and hopes. The desert has always been a place of transformation in the American imagination. It's where vision quests happen, where prophets wander, where people go to find themselves or lose themselves or escape themselves. Route 66 through the Mojave was part of that tradition. Dust Bowl refugees crossed it carrying everything they owned. Beatniks and hippies crossed it seeking enlightenment or escape. Every generation found something different in the desert's emptiness. Truck drivers have their own desert legends. Stories about the ghost traffic you sometimes see on radar, phantom vehicles that appear and disappear. About the woman in white who flags you down for a ride and then vanishes from your passenger seat. About strange lights in the sky, which are probably just military aircraft from the bases that dot the desert but might be something else. About the feeling you get sometimes on long nighttime drives that you're not quite alone in the cab, that there's a presence just out of sight in the mirrors. Most of us don't talk about these things, not seriously. Superstition is bad for business, and admitting you've seen or felt weird things makes you sound crazy. But spend enough time out here, especially the overnight runs when you're fighting sleep, and the road seems to stretch forever, and the radio crackles with nothing but static, and you'll understand why the desert has always been a place of visions. There are practical legends too, the stories that get passed between drivers. The best truck stops, the worst way stations, the speed traps where CHP loves to sit, which stretches of I-5 flood in winter, where the fog gets thick in the Central Valley, which rest areas are safe to park overnight and which ones you should avoid. And there are the legendary drives, the grapevine in a blizzard with chains on, Highway 1 through Big Sur in the fog, Donner Pass before the highway was widened, when it was two narrow lanes barely wide enough for a big rig. Drivers who have been on the road for decades have stories about every difficult stretch, every close call, every time they made it through something they probably shouldn't have. There's also the legend of California itself, which every driver brings their own interpretation to. For some, California is the promised land, the place where anything is possible, where the climate is perfect and opportunities are endless. For others, California is a disappointment, overpriced and overcrowded, and not nearly as glamorous as the postcards suggest. But almost everyone believes in California as an idea, even if the reality doesn't match. It's the western edge, the last frontier, the place where you go when you've run out of other places. That belief has driven people here for nearly 2 centuries, from the gold rush to the present day. And California's highways are the physical manifestation of that belief, the routes that people take when they're chasing the dream. Some find what they're looking for. Most find something else, something different, something they didn't expect. A few find nothing and turn around and go back. But the highways remain, patient and indifferent, ready to carry the next wave of seekers. Late at night in the desert, when you're alone with your thoughts and the road, you can understand California's appeal and also its melancholy. It's beautiful out here in a harsh way. It's free in a dangerous way. It's full of possibility but also full of failure. The ghost towns are reminders that nothing lasts, that even in California, the dream doesn't always work out. But people keep coming anyway. The highways keep calling. And that, maybe, is the greatest legend of all. The traffic report for Los Angeles is always the same. Delays on the 405, congestion on the 5, accidents on the 10, slow speeds everywhere. It's been like this for years, getting worse gradually but steadily, as if California's highways are slowly hardening like arteries. The joke is that LA has 2 rush hours, morning and all day. But it's not funny when you're sitting in it, watching the fuel gauge drop while your delivery window slips away. California's highways, the ones that were supposed to solve traffic forever, have become synonymous with traffic. We built more roads to relieve congestion, and the roads filled up. We widened them and they filled up again. We're running up against the fundamental law of transportation. Supply creates demand. California is trying to adapt. The state has invested billions in public transit, building light rail in Los Angeles, expanding BART in the Bay Area, planning high-speed rail between Los Angeles and San Francisco. But the high-speed rail project has been plagued by cost overruns and delays, its completion date pushed back again and again. Public transit helps, but it can't replace highways in a state that was built around automobiles. Electric vehicles are the other big push. California has aggressive targets for EV adoption and has banned the sale of new gas-powered cars starting in 2035. The highways are being retrofitted with charging infrastructure, particularly along Interstate 5, which is part of the West Coast Electric Highway Initiative. The goal is to enable zero-emission travel from Canada to Mexico. But EVs don't solve congestion. A zero-emission traffic jam is still a traffic jam. And they don't solve the equity issues built into California's transportation system. If anything, they might make them worse, since EVs are expensive and charging infrastructure is being built in wealthy areas before it reaches poor ones. There's also the ongoing challenge of maintenance. California's highways are aging. Many sections were built in the 1950s and 1960s and are now more than 60 years old. Pavement deteriorates, bridges develop cracks, drainage systems fail. The state's deferred maintenance backlog is estimated at over $100 billion. Highway 1 is a constant battle, with landslides requiring months of work and tens of millions of dollars to clear. The Grapevine requires extensive maintenance to handle the heavy truck traffic and severe weather. Elevated freeways in earthquake zones need seismic retrofitting to meet modern safety standards. Funding is always a problem. The gas tax doesn't generate as much revenue as it used to, both because cars are more fuel efficient and because more people are driving EVs. California has supplemented the gas tax with other transportation fees, but there's political resistance to raising them too much. Climate change adds another layer of complexity. More intense wildfires mean more highway closures and more damage from smoke and heat. More severe storms mean more flooding and erosion. Rising sea levels threaten coastal sections of Highway 1 and other routes. The highways that were built for one climate have to operate in a different one. Despite all these challenges, California's highways remain essential. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach handle 40% of the nation's container imports. The Central Valley produces a quarter of the nation's food. Silicon Valley creates technologies used around the world. All of it depends on the highways for distribution and access. For truck drivers, California represents both opportunity and challenge. It's the biggest economy in the nation, which means there's always freight to haul. But the regulations are strict, the traffic is terrible, and the cost of operating is high. California has emission standards for trucks, limits on idling, requirements for electronic logging devices. The ports have appointment systems that can leave you waiting hours for a load. The way stations are aggressive about enforcement, yet we keep coming, because California is where the loads are, because the weather is good most of the year, because even with all the problems, it's still the place where things happen, where industries are born, where the future gets made. The highways themselves are changing in subtle ways. Smart highway technology is being deployed, with sensors that monitor traffic flow and adjust ramp metering to optimize throughput. Cameras and automated systems track vehicles. Electronic tolling is spreading. The highways are becoming data collection systems as much as transportation infrastructure. There's talk of autonomous trucks, which could operate around the clock without fatigue and potentially reduce congestion, through better coordination. But that's years away, and it raises questions about what happens to the millions of people, myself included, who make a living driving trucks. California's highways in 2025 are both a triumph and a warning. They show what's possible, the immense distances and loads they can handle, the economic activity they enable. But they also show the limits of the car-centered approach to transportation. You can only widen a highway so much. You can only build so many lanes. Eventually, you have to find different solutions. The question is whether California will lead in finding those solutions, the way it led in building freeways 70 years ago. There are promising signs. The investment in EVs and public transit, the experiments with congestion pricing, the growing recognition that you can't pave your way out of traffic. But there's also resistance. People like their cars. They like the freedom and convenience. They've built their lives around the assumption that they can drive anywhere, anytime. Changing that requires more than new technology. It requires changing how people think about transportation, about urban design, about what it means to live in California. I don't know what the future holds, but I know the highways will be part of it. They're too embedded in California's geography and economy to go away. They'll adapt, change, incorporate new technologies. But they'll still be there, carrying goods and people across the state, connecting the coast to the interior, the cities to each other, California to the rest of America. And they'll still tell stories about who built them and who they displaced, about the dreams that brought people here and the realities they found, about freedom and its costs, about connection and division, about the endless American belief that if we just build the right road, if we just keep moving, we can leave our problems behind and find something better. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not, but the highways endure, patient witnesses to it all. The sun's coming up now, painting the eastern sky pink and gold. Another night on the California highways is ending. Another load delivered, another few hundred miles on the odometer. California's highways have carried us through history tonight. From the Spanish missions to the Gold Rush trails, from the transcontinental railroad to Highway 1's cliff-hugging beauty, from Route 66's dusty hope to Interstate 5's grinding commerce. We've seen the birth of car culture and its consequences, the legends of the road and the ghosts of what was lost. These highways made California possible, or at least the California we know today. They connected a vast and diverse state, enabled unprecedented growth, spread the car culture that would dominate America. They carried millions of dreamers west, some finding what they sought, others finding something else, all of them changed by the journey. But the highways also divided. They destroyed neighborhoods to make way for progress. They polluted the air and consumed the landscape. They promised freedom but created new forms of constraint. They were never neutral, never just engineering. Every mile of pavement was a choice, and every choice had consequences. California's influence on American highways can't be overstated. The state pioneered freeways, developed the gas tax funding model that the federal government adopted, showcased both the possibilities and problems of car-centered transportation. The interstate system that spans the nation was modeled on California's approach. For better and worse, California's highway story became America's highway story. Today, California faces the challenge of what comes next: how to maintain aging infrastructure, reduce emissions, address equity, manage congestion, adapt to climate change. The solutions won't be easy, but if history teaches us anything, it's that California has always been where America works out its transportation future first. The highways will endure. They're too essential to abandon, too expensive to replace. They'll evolve, incorporate new technologies, serve new purposes. Electric vehicles will replace gas-powered ones. Autonomous systems may change how we drive, but the basic function, moving people and goods across distance, will remain. And the stories will continue. Every truck driver will have their own California tales, their own experience of these highways. Every migrant will follow in the footsteps of the 49ers and the Dust Bowl refugees, coming west on the chance that California might offer something better. Every traveler will experience the beauty of Highway 1, the monotony of I-5, the nostalgia of Route 66. California's highways are more than transportation infrastructure. They're part of the American mythology, threads in the story we tell ourselves about who we are, about mobility and opportunity, about freedom and its limits, about the endless frontier and the Pacific Ocean that finally stops us. So thank you for riding along tonight. Thank you for listening to these stories of gold rush dreams and railroad ambitions, of coastal highways and desert ghost towns, of car culture born and consequences faced. California's highways connect not just places but also eras, carrying the past into the present, and the present towards some uncertain future. Keep your eyes on the road, driver. There's always another load to haul, another mile to cover, another story waiting around the next curve. California's highways aren't finished telling their tales, and neither are we. See you on the next road ahead.